Admiral James Stavridis, retired United States Navy, former Allied Supreme Commander of NATO, chairman of the Rockefeller Foundation, colleague at Carlyle Group, or former colleague at the Carlyle Group with Governor Youngkin, who began the hour. Good morning, Admiral. Did you, in fact, cross paths with Governor Youngkin when he was still at Carlyle?
Oh, I did. I worked for him. He was co-CEO at that time with another fellow named Hugh Lee. I enjoyed working with Glenn Youngkin. We talked a lot about cyber and cybersecurity, for example, and I think he is someone who has immense character and cares about the country and is a very high-quality individual.
Well, what we were talking about, he's about to go off to Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan, try and bring back some business. But I also asked him about, has he prepared the state for a world crisis with China? In other words, what would happen in Virginia with the largest shipbuilding yard in the world for the United States Navy and surge capacity if that world crisis tips over? And I want to ask you the same thing. Do you think Americans are thinking seriously at every level about what happens if the dress rehearsals for the invasion of Taiwan, the second of which has just finished, wrapped up, second in 2 months, 10 months, becomes the real deal? What would happen in the United States?
If China decided, and I don't think they will, so we can come back to our views of timeline here, but let's park timeline, whether it's 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years. Let's park that. So let's just say China decides to invade Taiwan. You are correct. They have shown us kind of two views of how they might approach it. Clearly, it includes a blockade. It includes long-range missile strikes, ballistic missile strikes, and it includes a high degree of cyber activity. So now we've seen all that, tracks with the war plans we've had. I think if the United States saw those events, my belief is we would work aggressively to defend Taiwan. I think we'd start by giving them a great deal more capacity than we have flowed in. And as you know, Hugh, PAC Fleet and Indo-Pacific Command practice this, game it, think about it every minute. If your question is what happens here on the home front, I think it would come as a big shock to Americans if there were a sudden precipitating event. Frankly, it would be a shock to me. I think this is 3 to 5 years away because I think the Chinese are more patient than perhaps others do. But we would be in shock. It would have a Pearl Harbor-like effect on us. It would cause some very hard decisions. And I think, no, we're not ready for a full-scale war with China, is the bottom line.
Should every governor do what Youngkin has done and basically study the what-ifs from the worst-case scenario, which it's the dress rehearsal that just wrapped up? The third one's the real deal, and it's happening in 3 months. And people assume we'll get some notice, but Europe had no notice in 1914, and we didn't have any notice of the Imperial Japanese Fleet, though a few people did warn FDR. If it happened, do you think every governor ought to be studying what the consequences are? Because the supply chain disruptions from COVID would be minor compared to what would happen if China attacked Taiwan.
Yeah, I would hope that every governor allocates some degree of attention to the international scene. I think some states are better at that than others. And Glenn Youngkin, as you mentioned, not only biggest shipyard, but also the biggest naval base in the world at Norfolk Naval Station. So I think my home state of Florida probably thinks about that. I suspect the California governor thinks about this. I think other smaller states, perhaps those more in the interior of the country, have less appreciation for it. But I'll tell you, a good place to start for each of these governors is to request a briefing on the impact of that. And I'd start with my adjutant general, my senior state military, 2-star general typically, who has plenty of pipe into the Pentagon and can arrange that kind of briefing. I think that would be prudent for any governor.
What about CEOs that do a bunch of business? I was just talking to Chairman Gallagher yesterday, and he just sat down with Tim Cook. And Apple is in a world of hurt. They can't get out of China, right? They can't. And so, have you been advising? We're not talking specifically about Apple now. Have you been advising any companies on how to prepare for what would be the consequences from a world crisis?
My role as a geopolitical expert and analyst is more along the lines of what are the chances that this could occur? What are the immediate tactical and operational effects? What is the likelihood of this happening? What are the timelines? Those are the kind of things that I'm particularly well positioned to talk about. I do not, as a general proposition, talk about the kind of business choices that you are articulating. I try and provide a sense of where the overall situation is going so that the business leaders, the people like Glenn Youngkin, when he was the CEO of the Carlyle Group, would be in a position to make those kind of business decisions. And by the way, I think you're absolutely correct. It's not just Apple. Many firms are very reliant on China for manufacturing, less so for services than for goods. And many of those businesses could find themselves in a very difficult position if a sudden, sharp conflict broke out. Again, I don't think that's likely. I know some believe it could happen in the immediate future. I'd say it's 3 to 5 years away at a minimum.
Now, Admiral, I chanced upon a name yesterday that I did not know, Newton D. Baker. Now, you normally know everything I don't know. Have you ever heard of Newton D. Baker? He was the Secretary of War during Wilson.
I do not immediately flash up with a mental picture of Newton D. Baker.
This is what surprised me. George Marshall said he was the best man he ever met. And think about everyone that George Marshall met, right?
Yeah.
So he was the Secretary of War during World War I, and for Wilson, he was mayor of Cleveland, almost got nominated in 1932. And while reading about him in the context of reading about the stand-up of the New Deal, FDR, and like Wilson before him, had to appoint people to oversee war production. I mean, it was a mess. It was a complete mess. Do you think it would be a mess again if we got into a conflict with China?
I think we would, as you say, would have to face a Pearl Harbor-like moment and mobilize the defense base. And we're seeing a mini version of what it might look like with the war in Ukraine, where we clearly are falling behind in delivering the really massive level of conventional firepower that the Ukrainians need. Here's the good news. The Ukrainians need very different things, very different military kit than we would need to deal with a China-Taiwan scenario. But the point is still the same. The defense industrial base, which is vast in this country, is not on a war footing, nor was it on December 6th, 1941. What I hope our opponents take away is that when we awaken that defense industrial base, it can move pretty damn quickly, and I think it would in this kind of scenario.
Now, Admiral, your timeline is 3 to 5 years, and I read 2034, and I thought it was pretty good, your novel of conflict with China, and I thought it was persuasive as to that. But 2 full-scale dress rehearsal invasions and President Macron of France going over there and not giving him a red light, basically saying, we're not in this, so badly that the French economic minister had to go to Brett Baer last night and say, we really didn't mean that. It's not the sort of stuff you need from the West to deter Xi, is it?
No, it's not. Again, let's put it in a historical context. It's a common argument to say, and look at Pearl Harbor. That came out of nowhere. No, it didn't. We looked at that possibility for conflict for well over a decade. We looked at it in the war colleges. We looked at it in what are the equivalents of the combatant commands in those days. That's happening now. And similarly, we didn't really see a bolt out of the blue. Tactically, we did, certainly, the attack on Pearl Harbor itself. But the movement of Japan was pretty clear to us. So I think those signals are out there. And I think we're in that kind of period right now. And again, just like with Japan, it took a decade and more before the sudden strike came. I'm unpersuaded that we are trending toward a sudden strike right now. That's
Why are you that way, Admiral? When he's running these dress rehearsals, why are you still on the, I don't want to call it optimistic. You're a realist. You're not an optimist, but you're not an alarmist. Why not?
I'll give you three reasons. One is President Xi's personality. Study his life. Take a look at him. There's nothing in it to suggest that he would make a sudden, rash, lunge-at-the-ball movement the way that Putin did. Xi is someone who spent years of his life shoveling manure on a collective farm, reapplied again and again to get in the Chinese Communist Party. His father fell from grace. He is a thoughtful, longer-range thinker. So I think his personality is one factor. Secondly, I don't think China's ready, and they know it. And in 3 to 5 years, they'll be much further along with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, the construction of the basic materials of war, the training and the exercises. And third and finally, to your point of two dress rehearsals, we simply ought to remember those were both conducted in response to meetings with the Speaker of the House. In one case, Pelosi, and the other case, McCarthy, of course. So I think those are important. We had to look at them. We had to vacuum up all the intelligence we can get. But we shouldn't, in my view, make a leap from that to, we're going to have a war in the next 6 months. I just don't see it.
So, Admiral, this is my last. I got to get this question in. This question, we've had a leak of national classified material. Nobody even recognized it at the Pentagon for 3 months. Do you think we will know? We will know, absolutely know, if China's going to do it?
We will never absolutely know, but the fact that the Pentagon missed what is, I think, going to turn out to be a kind of a gamer taking documents. I mean, there's a lot to unpackage here and fix, but I think it's a bit of a stretch to say, and therefore we're not going to be able to see China with our satellites, with our collection capabilities. We have pretty strong intelligence. I think we'll get more of a heads up. But, hey, let's keep digging through this and figure out what we can do to prepare.
Boy, I hope Admiral Stav is right. But I'm going the other way. He's not even an alarmist, and I usually am not, but now I'm going the other way. 2 in a row. Makes me worried. Admiral Stav, thank you. Follow him on Twitter at Stavridis J.